Okay, we're going to start the meeting, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. We're starting a little bit late. We had a vote to deal with, and we had a special occasion in the House of Commons today, which was very unique, unfortunately. We have our first set of witnesses today, but we also have three temporary members sitting in today. I'd like to welcome them. Mr. Stetsky, the NDP to my left, Ms. Dillon down to my far right, who's sitting in for Mr. Tan, and Mr. Arnold, who was sitting in for Ms. Bergen, who had to step out, but I'm advised that we can proceed in his absence, and he will return shortly. So thank you, the three of you, for being here today. We have three witnesses today. Frank DeRosier, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Innovation and Energy Technology. With him is, to my left, to his right, is Nicole MacDonald, Acting Director General, CanMet Energy Devon. And to his left, we have Terence Hubbard, Director General, Petroleum Resource Branch, Energy Sector. So the three of you, thank you very much for coming here today. This is, as I said, you are the first set of witnesses in a study we are embarking on dealing with the future of Canada's oil and gas, mining and nuclear sectors, in particular dealing with innovation, sustainable solutions and economic opportunities. And the three of you have kindly agreed to be here today to provide us some evidence and educate us on the oil and gas sector. So thank you very much. So I understand, Mr. DeRosier, you're going to do the bulk of the talking and start us off. So thanks very much. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here and launch this particular study. So we do have a short deck presentation, so I thought maybe launching a brief commentary around this, which is on the screen, and I understand you have copies of it as well. And I was hoping to cover three key elements in this overview. First, to do a quick overview of the oil and gas sector in Canada, talk about the importance of innovation in that space, and lastly, speak about some actions taken by the Government of Canada as it relates to innovation in oil and gas. So if I may maybe kick off in terms of a bit that overview, you have on slide 3 and on some numbers and figures which perhaps I could highlight succinctly. First, in terms of the resource endowment of Canada, both in oil and gas, Canada is blessed with very large resource. In oil, we have the third world's largest resource endowment after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. And similarly, natural gas, we have also a very abundant supply, which is actually keeps growing as technology progresses in that space. The oil and gas sector represent, in aggregate, close to 8% of GDP, about $137 billion of annual exports, large amount of investments as well, 200,000 direct employment across the country. So it is a fairly sizable source of wealth. Needless to say that in the current context, the price environment is rather challenging for commodities. We all watch this in our news regularly, and that's very true in the oil side in particular lately, as we've seen significant price drop during the past year. At the bottom right corner, you see a bit of a picture there that shows the trend over a medium to longer term. And there, I guess the story is that we've seen, on one end, significant increase in renewable energy happening in Canada and globally. But if we look at some of those estimates from the International Energy Agency and other world-leading bodies, we still have an expectation that oil and gas will represent a significant part of the global energy mix. La diapo suivante fait état de l'importance de l'innovation dans le secteur.
The next slide deals with the importance of technology and innovation. What's interesting here is that in terms of innovation, many of them have effect of reducing greenhouse gases, but also of reducing the cost of production. Now, in oil and gas, many of these opportunities have to deal with extracting resources or refining them. And in this case, it's particularly evident. What's important here is that these opportunities are not only national, but they're also in terms of export abroad. And when you look at the market for clean technology, it's growing. And according to recent estimates, it represents $2.7 billion by 2012. So this is a huge export market for our businesses. I would also like to mention that many of these technologies and the development of these technologies take place in remote communities. And they can also represent opportunities for our remote communities, including Aboriginal communities.
If we look at the past recent history of the oil and gas sector in Canada, it's already been known to be a knowledge-intensive industry. Lots of advanced technologies, but a lot of know-how also that I think is worth acknowledging. And we've seen this whether in the oil sands or in many other dimensions of the oil and gas sector. And you see here on the slide a few yardstick in terms of performance improvements over the past 20-year period. What it has to do with GHG emissions, where we've seen reductions in the order of 30% of the GHG emissions per barrel, but also in terms of water use, where we've seen very significant reductions in use of fresh water in production. Another domain that perhaps is less known among parliamentarians, but Canadians alike, is the expertise that Canada has in carbon capture and use. Canada is seen one of the top nations in terms of not just large-scale deployment of those technologies. We have 4 of the 15 largest large-scale projects in the world, but we also have significant expertise in terms of developing the future technologies in that space. I thought perhaps giving you a bit of a sense of those areas where we see the greatest potential for technology development. This is what I'll try to capture in this following slide, slide number 6. So starting in the oil sand domain, and to this, I thought using as an anchor the recent report published by the Council of Canadian Academies, which just came out less than a year ago, and it did showcase 6 of the most promising technology in the space. And I could describe, I thought, a couple of those that are particularly, we think, significant in terms of changing the landscape, both in terms of environmental performance and cost. First one is around use of solvent-based extraction technologies, which has the potential to reduce emissions of GHGs by the order of 50% and reduce 30% in terms of the capital cost requirements to develop such resource. Another one that the Council of Canadian Academies highlighted is the direct contact steam generation technology, which actually is being developed in our Calumet Energy facility here in Ottawa, working closely with Suncor, which is a major oil producer out west. And there, the potential for GHG reduction is in the order of 70 to 80%, and the cost reduction per barrel between $2 and $8, so also quite significant. But beyond the oil sand space, methane is another area where we see significant potential. It does represent about 10% of the global GHG emissions in the country, for a simple reason that all those gas that are either flare or vented in the country, those methane emissions have a much more potent impact in terms of GHG emissions by a factor of about 32 times greater than CO2. So every bit of progress we can make with regard to methane reduction has a very significant impact for our greenhouse gas emission pattern. And there the good news is that there's been a significant progress in terms of technology development to capture those gases and those hydrocarbons and finding ways to avoid that emission out in the atmosphere. This is a key priority for the Government of Canada, a key priority for the Government of Alberta, which has already been public in terms of its commitment to reduce those emissions by the order of 45% between now and the year 2025. But also many of our partner countries, like the US, have also put methane on top of their list in terms of early action, because the payback there is very compelling. So we think this should be an area of priority. Other areas that are very actively being pursued is around use of renewable energy as a source of power for some of the extractive sector, whether it's bioenergy, solar, or wind. There's a lot of activity in that particular space. And I've mentioned before the strength that Canada has in terms of carbon capture and use. So again, this is an area where we do a considerable work with our university and industry partners to further that technology and lower the cost, which is our main challenge in this space. Dans la diapo suivante, on fait
On the following screen, you can see how important research is, whether it has to do with public or private partners. Academia and industry and governments are important. So what that allows us to do is draw on the knowledge of all these partners and also reduce risk over time when it comes to developing these technologies, because they are complex technologies and they require expertise on all parts. We think that also we should be looking for partners abroad. And as you can see, there was a recent agreement that was signed last month when the Minister of Energy met in the North American Ministers of Energy. And so Canadian, Mexican, and American energy ministers agreed to have close cooperation over the next several years in order to be able to develop these kinds of technologies, whether it has to do in fossil fuel or green energy and renewable energy.
A snapshot, and I do acknowledge that this is a very succinct one, but understand the committee will hear from other witnesses over the coming weeks. But we'd like to acknowledge the leadership taken by the industry, in particular the members of the CUSIA, the Canadian Oil Sands Industry Alliance, who've had some boldness in terms of vision of bringing some of those technology developed separately initially to be shared among the companies involved in the space. So that accounts about 800 technologies worth over $1.3 billion. So we think this effort should be applauded and pursued with vigor from the industry, especially now that we face such predicament in terms of Paris environment. Now is the time to pursue those efforts. And we've seen some recent announcements that are being referenced here in the presentation. The next slide emphasizes some of the contribution from the Government of Canada in that space in two order. First, using our scientific expertise. And we're fortunate today to have the presence of one of our Director General from the Calumet Energy Lab out in Devon, Alberta, Nicole MacDonald, who is leading a lot of the work around that research out in Devon in Alberta. We also do a lot of that work here in Ottawa in our facility of Calumet Energy. And we have a third lab also in the Montreal region in Varennes. And those labs obviously deal with oil and gas, but also the broad spectrum of energy R&D in the country, and they have significant expertise in that space. And the second tool that I want to emphasize is some of our programs. So both NRCan and SDTC, to name those two, have been committing significant amount of resources over the past years to develop those technologies across the country. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I thought maybe closing the remarks by emphasizing one announcement that took place in Paris on the margins of the COP21 meetings back in late November, where Prime Minister Trudeau was accompanied with 19 other world leaders on the stage to commit to mission innovation. And there was so many announcements happening during those time period that it was hard to keep track of them all. But this one was actually quite significant. It committed those 20 nations, which included not just Canada, the US, Mexico, but also Germany, Italy, France, China, Japan, South Korea, pretty much all the key nations involved in energy R&D at the global stage, to do three things. First one is to double the level of energy R&D over the next 5 years. Second, to bring private sector patient capital to the mix. And there, Bill Gates showed some leadership, committing some of his own monies, but also brought along a number of large investors from around the world to contribute to funding in this space among the signatory countries, which includes Canada. And thirdly is to encourage more collaboration across borders, precisely to deal with those advancement of transformative technologies, which are so challenging to develop. And those nations felt that this was one of the most powerful vector to get our nations a step closer to meeting the Paris ambition that have been laid out by those nations. So on this, I'd like to turn the floor back to you.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful and very informative. And I'm now going to open the floor to some questions. And I'm going to start to my right. Mr. Harvey's got the floor.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming, taking time out of your schedule. And as the chair said, I too apologize for the fact that we were late getting started today. I just wanted to lead off, I guess, by talking about a little bit about something that you put in one of your first slides, which is the oil and gas sector is a key pillar in the Canadian economy, representing close to 8% of Canada's GDP and 137 billion in exports. And I think, the spirit of this study is definitely along the lines of looking to see how we can help position the sector to move forward in a collaborative fashion that's going to allow further development at a time when it seems to be struggling. So my first question, I guess, to you is, how do you feel the government involvement in clean technology can help generate opportunity and job creation in both natural resource and technology sectors?
Should I answer it? Yes. So the committee member is right to point out the sheer significance of this industry, and it's sometimes tempting to be distracted by some of the ups and downs in the short term. The government has committed in the recent pronouncements to invest significant amount of monies in that space by using a variety of instruments, starting with expenditures measures. So there's a $200 million per year over 4 years that has been committed for innovation in natural resources for both energy, forestry, mining, fisheries and ocean, and agriculture. And the second source of funding there is $100 million a year over 4 years for support for clean tech producers. So that should certainly give some significant push to advance this innovation agenda, but also committed to look at the variety of measures, looking at regulations, tax measures as well, the green infrastructure funds, the $60 billion over 10 years, $20 billion for green infrastructure, which should meaningfully contribute to that particular space in terms of creating that demand pool. So those set of instruments combined should provide some significant kind of push and pull for the sector.
Okay.
Recognizing that the global markets still have to go its to own gyration, which are well beyond the control of Canada. So there we'll have to keep the eyes on the ball in terms of a medium to longer term, I would submit, to see how the price do evolve. But at least in terms of the controllable element, the government is determined to take more action.
Okay. Okay, so I guess what other benefits do you think that this type of investment could have for the sector, and specifically the pillar of oil and gas, as that's what we're going to lead off with as the first pillar. So what other types of benefits do you think that we can garner, either directly or indirectly, from this type of investment in clean technology and green infrastructure?
I didn't quite hear the question. Would you mind? It's just difficulty with my hearing aids.
A bit. Now, so I guess what I was saying is, that having been said, what other types of benefits, either directly or indirectly, do you feel that the natural resource sector, and specifically oil and gas, can garner from this type of investment in green infrastructure and clean tech?
Mm-hmm. I was in the Globe just this past week, and we have a significant interest on the part of those companies to team up and use some of those funds and leverage also private sector funding and university funding to advance that research. So I do believe that we have a significant amount of capacity to respond to those programs that are to be announced over the coming years. So I'm fairly confident that there's enough kind of responsive capacity out there to bring about the kind of technology we're looking for. But this is going to be, and one has to be cognizant of this, many of those technologies I've described, especially the transformative ones, we're talking like many years for them to be brought to market and be scaled up. So while they do depend of the level of complexity, it would not be uncommon to talk about like 5 to 7 years or so to bring this kind of technologies to market, then being able to test it at a more large scale, and eventually being able to deploy it broadly. So 5 to 10 years into horizon to see those applied to a large scale would be true. But there's also shorter time technologies, shorter implementation time for some of the measures that could be looked at. Methane is one example that I've showcased. The technologies are available and could be deployed right away and benefit the oil and gas sector.
Okay. I guess on page 8, one of the bullets said, in current price environment, industry is being challenged to maintain investment in R&D. So I guess my question is, do you feel this is possibly the most important time to see investment on government's behalf in new technology to help further the R&D development within this sector?
Yes, and from the government side, the intentions have been stated clearly. From the industry side, it is rather challenging right now to free up cash flow to do this, but absolutely, now is the time. And I think listening to some of the industry leaders in the space, both publicly and privately, they do acknowledge that now is probably the perfect moment to double up in terms of innovation effort. But it is challenging for them to free up the necessary resources to do it.
Okay. I guess I just got one last question is, on page 10, one of the bullets specifically says, as part of Canada being one of the 20 countries that will double spending on clean energy R&D over the next 5 years, working closely with the private sector to encourage investment through the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, and increase domestic and international energy R&D collaboration. My question is, how do you feel that increased domestic and international collaboration can help further the R&D within the sector?
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, a lot of the technologies involved there are very complex. So being able to kind of leverage some of the expertise and the monies to carry on some of those demos. To give you an example, a large-scale demo in the oil and gas sector can range very quickly between $50 to $100, $125 million a pop. So to the extent possible, when we could do those large-scale demos, for instance, jointly with either the US, Mexico, or other leading nations, it's a chance for us to lower the risk in being able to pursue more of those technologies and bring them to the marketplace. And I have to say that the perhaps thanks to the Paris discussions that took place during the past months, there's a sense of celerity and understanding of the need collectively to accelerate the pace of those efforts. And it's not just true in North America, also in Asia and Europe, and the willingness to collaborate is stronger than ever. And we've seen now since the December discussions, a lot of interest being showed by our partner countries who want to team up with Canada and our firms to do more of that research. So I'm fairly hopeful that as the months and years come, we'll be able to forge more of those cross-border research collaborations and being able to advance more rapidly through the innovation spectrum some of those technologies.
Thank you very much. That's Mr. Tarvey's time, so I understand, Mr. Barlow, you're going to take the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I want to thank all of you for coming here and taking time in your schedule. And you know, we were late, but I think it was for fantastic reasons, probably something that we will all remember as parliamentarians, that time we had in the House today. And great to have a fellow Albertan here. Ms. McDonald, thank you very much for coming and bringing this very crazy weather. I was really happy to see in your report something that we do a very poor job of, I think, as government and in industry for that matter. For example, the Prime Minister is going to be in Washington this week talking as a guest speaker with a group that calls our oil industry and our energy sector dirty business. When your information that you have just reiterates the fact that we have among the cleanest energy sector in the world. You know, I look at a 30% reduction in GHGs since 1990. You know, and I'm sure, Nicole, you may want to touch on this as well. I hope that's okay if I called you Nicole, sorry. You know, if you have a chance, or my colleagues have a chance to go to the oil sands in northern Alberta, there are no tailing ponds anymore. There are no flare stacks. And that's, we do a horrible job in terms of telling the story that we have in our energy sector. What kind of time is taken with your department in terms of marketing these kinds of statistics? And I know you can't speak to what the Prime Minister is going to be doing in Washington this week, but I think a big win for us, or a big change, would be telling this story in terms of Canada's record in terms of innovation and environmental stewardship. Is there anything going towards marketing these numbers?
That's a very good point, and perhaps it speaks to the nature of our fabric as Canadians. We tend to be humble, but humility sometimes may not be such a good thing when we get to promoting some of our successes in terms of advancing the technology in the space. And there seems to be a bit of a lag between where the industry and the technologies are at now and the perception. not just within the Canadian public, but among some of our external clients. And I have to say that the efforts over the past should certainly be pursued and probably enhanced to showcase some of those initiatives. I'm thinking particularly to some of the work of some of our small, medium-sized firms active in the space, many of which have been recipient of some of the support and advance some of those great technologies. I'm thinking, for instance, in terms of water technologies, gas flying is another example that is coming to mind, where we were truly world leaders in that space. We did some sessions, for instance, down in Washington, in working closely with our mission there to bring some of the companies and let them do the sharing of their practices. We did also quite a number of sessions, again, just this past week in Globe, at Globe Conference in Vancouver, where we brought some Canadian companies to connect with South Korean firms, Chinese firms as well. And there was some B2B sessions, but also some more open session to share the results of their work. There's large-scale exhibit also taking place there, and those events are great because we had like over 50 countries in attendance, over 2,000 delegates, 10,000 or so attending the actual showcase of those technologies. So those are our venues where it can be done. But I would agree, Mr. Chair, with the committee member that this is an area where we could do better, and we should definitely work also with our Global Affairs Canada colleagues and the clean technology experts that we have around our missions to get the message out.
Thank you, and I would just mention as a comment to that is our tone right now from our government is the opposite of what you're saying. You're saying we're having to delay everything. We need to find that social license and more consultation. Where these numbers show, our record is extremely strong, and I would encourage the government to spend some time changing the tone and narrative on what they're saying right now because uncertainty in this industry is certainly not helping. But my next question is, in your information you had, the oil and gas industry is close to 8% of GDP, 200,000 jobs, direct jobs, doesn't include indirect. But have you done anything in terms of what the impact on our GDP and what the impact on the jobs would be if we were replacing the 630,000 barrels a day that we're importing from foreign countries, if we could replace that with domestic oil through something like Energy East? What would be the impact on our GDP and jobs?
Thank you for the question. I don't think we have a specific number in terms of impact on GDP or in jobs related to oil production that could be displaced by displacing imports into Canada. Would note, though, that Canada is a large and growing exporter of crude oil. As the statistics in the deck show, the oil and gas sector is a significant part of Canada's economy and supports a lot of employment across the country. And as we move forward and look at opportunities to continue to support and grow this industry going forward, we'll continue to support jobs in this sector. So.
I would suggest that if we can, that might be something to look into. If you have a chance at a study or some sort of work that could be done to show the impact of that, that would be helpful. How am I doing for time? Perfect. I'll be really quick. I was really excited to see the numbers there in terms of what has been achieved through research and development. I think that's fantastic. I'm just wondering, what are the partnerships, or is there a partnership with the private sector on that R&D? Are those federal dollars being leveraged with the private sector to work on some of those innovative ideas, not only in Alberta but across the country?
Absolutely. And I would say every single project that we're leading in this space are done in collaboration with industry. And the reason for which is twofold. Yes, getting leverage and make sure that we have an impact, but probably more importantly is relevance. There's no point in the lab that Nicole directs, for instance, to carry on research on some kind of arcane domain that's not going to lead to anything. So making sure that there's adoption at the end of the road for us is a key measure of success. And by partnering up early on with industry and universities who have significant capacity in the space is, in our view, a way to ensure success in terms of adoption. Similarly, when we do provide funding through our own programming, SDTC and others, the benefit goes directly with those firms. But again, one of the key variables for the selection is leveraging and collaboration with others, as we want to make sure that people work together. So we don't have half a dozen people working on the same widget, and competing with one another. We have limited firepower in the country to advance such research. We want to do it together to the extent we can.
Thank you. Mr. Stetsky, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you again for being here. Very important topic for Canadians. So, specific to crude oil, what measures does the department have in place to encourage value-added processing and job creation in Canada?
One of our key 4 domains of research in the oil side is upgrading. It's been stated as one of the top priorities for the government of Alberta, and it's also as an interest in a couple ways. You've mentioned the benefit in terms of job creation and creating investment opportunities, but it's also an opportunity to free up our pipeline network, because this upgraded oil is less viscous and therefore easier to transport within our pipeline system. So it also has significant benefit in that regard, and it's also a chance for us to get more value out of that products on the export market and diversify our market base in terms of refineries who can actually take our crude. So this has actually been an area of active research and close collaboration, I would say, with the Alberta Innovates, which is the research arms of the government of Alberta, who have been very good partners for us to do some of that work. Any supporting points?
Would also add, while Canada is a large net exporter of crude oil, we're also a net exporter of petroleum products. We do currently produce in Canada more oil or more petroleum products than what we consume, particularly on the east coast of Atlantic Canada. And obviously, as we go forward and look at opportunities and the innovation agenda going forward, will help support the development of a robust and competitive industry here in Canada. I think innovation, we talk about improving environmental performance a lot on that side of things, but it's also a key driver in reducing costs to ensure that we can develop this industry here in Canada.
So does the department actually have a mandate to try and keep jobs in Canada then? Keep the oil in Canada and deal with it here rather than ship it away?
So our mandate within the Department of Natural Resources is looking at the sustainable development of our resources. So looking at ways to develop these resources and support a competitive industry in Canada, but also doing it in such a way that's environmentally sustainable going forward. So we do have that dual role, dual mandate.
Question to renewable and green energy sources. So innovation and new energy technologies will continue to be very important, of course, when it comes to developing all of our natural resources. If we're being sincere, we should be trying to do it in an environmentally sensitive way. So what role do renewable and green energy sources play in accomplishing that goal of environmentally sustainable industry?
Mm-hmm. So as it relates to kind of broad energy R&D, we put a significant effort around renewable, whether it's on smart grid, whether it's integration of renewable within the grid, which is a key challenge for utilities around the country. Developing also our biomass. We've got a very large amount of biomass coming from agricultural production or forestry, which ought to be put to good use. So all of those are important driver from a broad energy R&D perspective. As it relates directly to oil and gas, as I referenced before, one of the most promising avenues is to look at use of those renewable resources to power the extractive industries. And there's been lots of efforts to look into use of wind power in particular, solar, geothermal as well could be an attractive options. We do a significant amount of research out of our own laboratories in terms of use of bioenergy and bioproducts with FP Innovation and the industry directly. This is still nascent, to be clear, but it could have a nice potential for both industries to generate value for the forest producers and also a chance to green the oil and gas activities. So we still are some years away to get some of those bioproducts into the mix, but we think it's well worth investing efforts.
So you are working towards more renewable energy future then?
Correct.
Okay. Oil sands and heavy oil projects face some significant disadvantages in the global marketplace, like a significantly higher cost of production, larger environmental footprint, and difficulty accessing wider markets, to name just a few. What kinds of innovations are, if you'll excuse me for the pun, in the pipeline that you can tell us about that was help us to offset those disadvantages? And if there aren't any, are there limits to how much technological innovation can help to close that gap and put oil sands and heavy oil on a level competitive footing with other global oil sources?
Mm-hmm. The committee member, Mr. Chair, is right to point out some of the shortcomings or some of the challenges we face. Before I answer the question, it's also worth remembering that Canada also has competitive advantages with regard to its oil production. The fact that we are a stable economy, we have plentiful supplies, we're steady suppliers, like we've got a lot of strengths in our game that we shouldn't lose sight of. And we only need to be reminded by looking at those other world producers out there. And whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Venezuela, like there's a lot of trouble spots where that oil is being produced. So just something well worth keeping in mind. On the dimension that you've touched on, where we can do some further progress, cost reduction is top of a priority list for the industry. So is addressing environmental performance. I think there's an acknowledgement more so than ever now from industry leaders that we need to act on both fronts. And there's a very strong support also by the part of provinces. We understand that we need to kind of move the yardstick significantly in terms of environmental performance and cost to keep the industry running, not just for the short-term price environment that we're in, but also to make sure that we're competitive on the long haul. The kind of technologies I've described, the so-called transformative technologies in the extraction side are, in my view, probably the most attractive. Right now, the industry is more focused on looking at marginal or incremental improvements to cost of productions, which are certainly well worth looking into in terms of project management, in terms of marginal improvements to use of energy in the production processes. But to address the gist of your question, there's been more effort lately during the past year or two to look at more of those transformative technologies would give us a step change in terms of both environmental performance and cost. And the good news is that we have in our arsenal, if I may say, half a dozen or so technologies who could get us there and bring us to a significantly lower cost of production and emissions as well. And water should not be lost in terms of that equation. It's also a top priority for the industry. So that line of sight is there. But again, it will take us many years to bring those technologies to market. But we're committed to do our part as a government, and the industry appear to be also very much on side.
Thank you.
To pursue those efforts.
Thank you. I've been pretty generous on the time so far. I'm going to have to start getting a little stricter here. Mr. Surrey, over to you.
You're going to get stricter.
So I know it's a bad time to say that.
Thank you. Je voudrais commencer par remercier.
I want to thanking our guest today and thanking you for your presentations. That's excellent information, and it gives us a good basis to build on. We know that because of the oil prices and prices over the past few years going down, that this represents a challenge for the industry. I just wanted to point out this.
About our Prime Minister. I mean, I'm very proud of the efforts that our Prime Minister and the government has done. We've been in government now for 5 months, 150 days or so, and we've participated heavily with the Paris conference, as you mentioned here earlier. Our Prime Minister is visiting with the U.S. President this week, first time in 12 years that has happened, to dialogue, to grow our economy, to put forward the initiatives that we talked about on the positive way, because we have a lot of success stories in all of our natural resources sectors. That's very positive. We've also had a First Ministers Conference in the first time in 7 years. And now you mentioned also the energy that we had Canada, U.S., and Mexico. So there's a lot of good collaboration happening and something that we could build on what you had mentioned earlier about the innovation and sector. So my question, when I look at the reports that you've identified here, and I appreciate you condensing a lot of this, can you summarize, you mentioned earlier about the Clean Tech Fund of about $100 million. You also mentioned another fund that was to all sectors, natural resource sector, and you also mentioned tax measures. Are you able to summarize those 3 elements of what's been done in the last 4 or 5 years or so, and for the committee? You have all that information that you could provide to us?
Sure. So these were explicitly stated in the government's intention going forward. There's been no yet announcements on the specifics of how those monies will be deployed, but the intention is quite clear to give that extra boost, which is significant in terms of dollars. And the fact that it's multi-year should also give a degree of certainty to the actors and, as you've mentioned, our provincial partners to advance this. So I would foresee that coming out of the FMM discussion just in Vancouver last week, that this will be part and parcel of our dialogue with them over that 6 months time period, where we've committed to solicit and consult broadly among the public, the industry, stakeholders, provinces as well, and make sure that we use those monies wisely. The government, I guess, had a choice whether to go fast and trying to get it out of the door quickly, or do it well, if I may say so, and taking, as a result, a bit more time to consult and make sure that there was alignment. At the strategic level, there's a degree of alignment that between the federal, provincial parties that probably has not been present for many years now on those issues of climate change and the energy policy and innovation that goes along with it. And it's an opportunity for the country to make sure we use those resources smartly. So in short, no announcement yet, but significant degree of engagement and consultation. I'd like to point out that Minister Carr carried a number of roundtables around the country already, and it is his intention to pursue this engagement broadly with not just provincial partners, industry leaders, Indigenous leaders as well, municipal partners, to seek people's ideas and views.
Thank you, I agree a lot what was said earlier too about our commitment, and what I'm looking at too is when we look at it as a country on the R&D. You mentioned CamNet Energy, I think is the vehicle that does a lot of the R&D. Is there a possibility when you're summarizing, what are the amounts of dollars that we invested in R&D? I'll give you an example. For Australia spends like $2.7 billion in the mining industry for R&D, and in Canada we used to spend about $800 million. Now we're spending about $500 million in the mining sector. But can you summarize that also in the oil and gas as what we've done and committed and moving forward? One question. The second element overall, when you look at obviously the three of you probably have decades here of experience in the field, and when we look at all these conferences that are happening within Canada and the conferences that are happening worldwide, and linking the economy and the environment are one. Those discussions need to happen as one. Are you able, in a nonpartisan way, look at recommendations from your experience in these areas of R&D, where R&D monies should be invested and how they should be invested when we look at the elements that we just talked about? Mm-hmm. Making some specific recommendations. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the amount of monies being devoted, they do come from different programs and agencies, but the numbers that I had captured on slide 9 was, we thought, probably the best summation of this. So $365 million over the past 10 years. So it is pretty significant. Keeping in mind, again, that those dollars are significantly leveraged from industry. It would be pretty typical in the space to have a leverage of at least 2, if not 3 to 1 for those monies. And when we get further down to the deployment stage, it's that multiple could be even higher, 4 or 5 to 1 in the case of large-scale demos, for instance. As for energy research priorities, yes, we do have in every one of our research activities that are being driven, and perhaps I could ask Nicole to describe that more fully. We have a fairly well-established process whereby we solicit input views from industry, provincial partners, university partners, our expert scientists within the federal family, to identify what those research priorities ought to be. And I guess what's new is also now we've extended the discussion to some of our international partners, especially during the past year and a half or so. We've had very close dealings back and forth with the U.S. Department of Energy, who has a very significant research establishment. Just to give you a ballpark sense of the dollars involved, they spend annually about $6.4 billion of energy R&D, and they share many of the same challenges as we do, and they're very keen to partner with Canada, which is seen as one of those leading nations in that space. So we're quite enthusiastic about the prospects to do more and more of those research projects together.
Perfect timing. You're right on the buzzer there. I'm sorry, Ms. McDonald, but maybe we can come back to you later on today. Now we're into round 2, so we're into 5-minute segments, and Ms. Stubbs is up next. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks all of you for being here, and apologies again for the delay. I know it's going to come as a total shock to my colleagues that I'm going to try to focus on the importance of the oil and gas sector to Canada's economy overall, which I want to thank you for underscoring so substantially in your opening presentation. And I also want to just thank you, too, for highlighting Canada's global leading role in developing innovation and technology that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase production efficiencies, lower costs, and really make us a beacon for innovative and technological development of energy resources. And I want to thank you, too, for noting the critical role of the oil sands in Canada's overall energy picture that will enable us in the future to meet the world's growing energy demands as we continue to increase our responsible development of that resource as well as other crude oil resources. And I just thought maybe we could try to get into a little bit more specifics about exports and imports. So maybe I'll just give you a couple of questions in a row, and then we can figure out what we're doing for timing, and maybe the chair can just give me a heads up where we're at. So in terms of exports, are you able to just break down within the commodities between crude oil, synthetic crude oil, bitumen, natural gas, electricity, and refined petroleum products? And can you give us an estimate on what those accompanying export revenues are and the breakdown of the countries to which those exports are going? Can you also give a little bit more specifics on the countries to which Canada, from which Canada imports our energy products and their related breakdowns? And I'd be especially interested in looking for facts relating to the oil and gas imported for use in Eastern Canadian refineries. And I agree, as you've pointed out, of course, that Canada has the world-leading skills and technology to continue to provide energy to the world. And I just wonder if you have any estimates about global energy demand predictions, and also about the potential value of our exports to other countries if we are able to achieve access to diverse markets beyond the U.S.
So unless my friend next door amazes me with all those numbers in his sleeves, I think this is, Mr. Chair, a great one where we could commit to report back to committee with some numbers. Yes, we do have those statistics that the committee members sought in terms of export-import by country, so we could do a nice little summary table there and simulate it in terms of global energy demand, right?
Certainly would be happy to get back to you on some of this, but
I was going to say maybe that's a good idea, because unless you can summarize it in less than 2 minutes, we're going to have no choice. So.
Could respond to some of the key highlights there in terms of some of the questions that you asked. So in terms of crude oil exports, Canada exported over 3 million barrels per day of crude oil last year. 97% of that went to the United States. Natural gas, we produce about 13.7 billion cubic feet per day. About a little over 8 of that goes to the United States in terms of exports. We import about a little over 700,000 barrels per day of crude oil into refineries in Eastern Canada. About 60% of that, a little over 60%, comes from the United States. Other countries that it comes from include countries like the UK, Norway, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, a number of different countries. It all depends on global markets and market conditions and prices, quality differences for those types of crude in terms of where refineries choose to purchase their crude oil from. Global energy demand predictions, there was some numbers in the presentation, but generally numbers from our colleagues at the International Energy Agency continue to see global energy demand continue to increase going forward. And that provides a real opportunity for us here in Canada in the sense that there will be continued opportunity into the future for the development of our oil and gas resources and to play a role in meeting that global demand.
Thank you. We've got about 10 seconds left, so we'll move on then. Okay, thanks. Mr. McLeod, you're up and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters today. I appreciate the information you're bringing forward. I'm from the Northwest Territories, and the Northwest Territories, as you probably know, is still relatively pristine. There's diamond mines and oil and gas exploration that has happened there for a number of years. We've seen a lot of boom and bust cycles. And of course, the people in the North have always expressed concern when it comes to projects and making sure that the environmental aspect of it is scrutinized very closely. But at the same time, job creation is very important to us also. And we're quite fortunate that we have diamond mines that are providing a lot of opportunity for us. And the population of Northwest Territories is half Aboriginal, so including Aboriginal people is also very important. And I think the key to moving forward on a lot of projects is to have a trustworthy regulatory process. And I think we have a model in Northwest Territories, other people in other jurisdictions that can look at that does all and captures all the areas that we want to make sure are covered. While we welcome opportunity to see our resources developed, we are still challenged by a number of things, a number of factors that are can be dealt with. We have a lot of resources in terms of diamonds, precious metals, emeralds, oil and gas, all these things that have not been really explored to its fullest yet, so we don't really know the potential. And the reasons for a lot of the exploration not happening is because our transportation infrastructure is not developed yet in the Northwest Territories. There is opportunity to develop a road down the Mackenzie Valley Highway, and that would open up the whole valley to oil and gas opportunities, help lessen the cost of building pipelines, tourism. A lot of economic opportunities would come as a result of it. There is opportunity to build a road into the Clecho area, which would allow for the communities to be connected, and gold mines that are working in the area would be able to make their projects viable. We've also been looking at the road to the current diamond mines, which allow the mines to explore other pipes that are in the area that maybe are not as don't produce as well or wouldn't have the returns, but with a road in the area would certainly make it more viable. And also this road would be able to connect with Nunavut. And Nunavut is very much in a position where all their resources are trapped unless they get a road. And they have talked about building a road into Grace Lake, which would open up their part of the country to creating opportunity and jobs. And that's something that's really important for us to see. So I wanted to ask about how you see this government's role in moving investment in transportation infrastructure in North. I'm not only talking about Northwest Territories, but Nunavut as a priority.
A minute. One.
So I have to admit, this is a little bit beyond my area of expertise, transportation. But perhaps out of the committee could solicit witness views on this. There is a significant infrastructure fund that has been set aside. Whether this will address those particular demands, I wouldn't want to mislead the committee members in any kind of way. It's not my area of activity. Perhaps one thing, though, if I may point out, as it relates to energy R&D and the kind of mining project you've described, which I think would be particularly of interest, is looking at both increasing use of renewable energy to power some of those mines, or in most cases off-grid. And we've used particularly wind power as a key source of production. In another area that has been, in our eyes, quite promising is looking at energy input for the production of those mines. After labor, it's the second highest input cost for the activities of those mines. And the industry has conveyed to us a keen interest to look at novel ways to reduce the energy demands, particularly as it relates to ventilation, where a lot of wasted heat is being produced, and using automotive vehicles and things like this for the underground mining activities. But on road transportation per se, I'm not probably the best one to answer that one.
All right. Well, on that note, we're right at the 5-minute mark, so that's appropriate. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Mr. Arnold, I understand you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here substituting for Candice Bergen, the official opposition critic for natural resources. We know that through royalties and taxation, the energy business and workers contribute significantly to the public service as well as overall standard of living in communities all across Canada. Can you tell us how the oil and gas sector impacts other industries in Canada? For example, when times are good and when times are bad, or how other industries are impacted by the trickle-down effect?
It's a very good point, and this is in economics speaks what we call indirect impact. And sometimes people tend to overlook the significance of those. So whether it's for manufacturing, engineering, legal services, financial services, all sort of like local industries, whether it's trucking, whether it's employment services, those impact are quite significant. And you feel it both in the upside, as we've witnessed over the past many years, not just in Alberta, but Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador. We've benefited from a significant upswing of the oil and gas activity, but also when suddenly the price fall. And this is actually the support of those industries. They felt it most directly during the recent reductions, both in terms of volume business, but also margins. We've seen many of those suppliers being squeezed to reduce the overall cost of the activities of those oil and gas operations.
Okay. Seeing the recent downturn in oil prices and the potential for LNG export out of British Columbia, can you see a correlation, or is there an opportunity there that the industry is working on in hopefully moving some of those resources to support that possibility of getting the LNG to market, such as the infrastructure that's needed to do that?
I would say that there's enormous opportunity, both in terms of the long-term interest in our oil industry, but also in the gas industry going forward. The LNG industry has tremendous prospect for us to capitalize on our natural gas resources. As the United States' domestic natural gas production increases, for us to maintain Canadian natural gas production levels, we need to find new markets going forward. And the development of an LNG industry will help Canada be able to capitalize on the growing international market for gas going forward.
So I guess, has there been, or are you looking at a transfer of some of the resources that had been going towards the petroleum sector, hopefully channeling some of those government resources to assisting the LNG process?
In terms of research and development expenditures, or resources more broadly?
Capital expenditures, incentives that way. I know last year our government introduced capital cost deferments and so on that assisted with the capital projects there.
So there have been steps taken over the last couple of years, and efforts continue to work closely with the government of BC and other provinces to support the development of an LNG industry here in Canada. Canada does have a competitive tax environment compared to other international players, and we do have a tremendous resource base. So there is an enormous opportunity for Canada to capitalize on this LNG advantage, but recognizing that it's a competitive international market. There are a number of other countries seeking to capitalize on the same opportunity. So need to continue to kind of work with partners to create the conditions for the successful development of an industry like this going forward.
Thank you. I don't know if I have any time left.
You've got just over 40 seconds.
Would I pass my time on to one of the other members if they have?
Oh, Given that certainty and timeliness on the part of government is important for developers and investment, both in innovation and in energy production, are you able to give us any timelines in terms of finalization and clarity on the potential regulatory changes and any additional measures that could also expedite commercialization of technology?
So beyond LNG.
In 10 seconds or less, yeah.
You say?
In 10 seconds or less.
I think some of those, the consultation that I've referenced early on are on a 6-month track. So one would envisage that hopefully by the late summer, early fall, there'll be a consensus emerging. And to when the announcement would occur, it's hard to say right now.
Thank you. Mr. Lemieux, you have 5 minutes now.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the 3 witnesses today. I wanted to follow up on liquefied natural gas. In British Columbia, they're hoping to build 3 LNG installations, and I want to know what the government will doing to follow this in British Columbia in terms of exports of LNG, etc. Could you speak more to that?
So there are a number of private sector proposals. I think there are as many as 20 private sector proposals to develop LNG facilities in BC. Certainly, based on future opportunities going forward, in terms of overall market demand globally, not all of those projects will move forward. But Canada has some tremendous advantages in terms of developing these resources, both in terms of the resource base that we have in Canada, the shipping distances between Canada and primary markets in the Asia-Pacific region, to capitalize on the development of this industry going forward. But to realize and take advantage of these opportunities, need to have a framework in place that Canadians can be confident that these resources can be developed safely and in an environmentally sustainable manner. The government's taken steps to announce kind of how it will make decisions on these projects going forward to ensure that investors have certainty on what the process will look like, but also Canadians can have confidence in how the government will take into consideration factors related to these developments going forward, including potential impacts of these development opportunities on things like climate change commitments going forward. So there are a number of activities going forward, both in terms of working with the Government of BC in supporting and advancing regulatory decisions on these projects, as well as some of the activities that Frank had mentioned before in working with industry and other partners on the innovation agenda to support the development of these resources in the most environmentally and competitive manner possible.
Est-ce que le gouvernement fédéral
Is the federal government also considering possible projects, LNG projects in eastern Canada?
That is correct. There are a number of LNG proposals in eastern Canada, both across various jurisdictions, Nova Scotia, in Quebec, and in New Brunswick as well. Again, there's opportunities going forward for these projects to proceed. A lot of interest from international markets in terms of Canada's ability to be a secure, reliable partner to supply energy for the long term. So there's a number of proposals that have been moving forward and working closely with those jurisdictions as well to understand what the opportunities are and how we can work collaboratively to support these development opportunities going forward.
Moi, je suis très attiré par l'énergie renouvelable. Dans ma région du Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, il est beaucoup question de construire des usines de production de biocarbone métallurgique à partir de résidus forestiers. Est-ce que CANMET a réalisé à ce jour des études sur la production industrielle à grande échelle de biocarbone métallurgique qui pourrait être utilisé dans l'industrie de la sidérurgie canadienne?
Oui, on a une équipe, en fait, à l'équipe de CANMET Énergie à Ottawa qui fait ce type d'études. tant d'études socio-économiques, de voir un peu comment une industrie comme celle-là pourrait prendre forme, mais aussi pour tester ces technologies, pour voir si elles livrent les indicateurs de performance qui ont été mis de l'avant par les développeurs de ces technologies, mais aussi pour les tester, soit dans nos laboratoires ou avec de nos partenaires industriels.
With our industrial partners. So you don't have any large-scale industrial projects? Not yet. We're really at the testing phase of the technology. Thank you.
30 seconds left if you want to share the rest of your time.
I want to use this 30 seconds. As you just mentioned, also showing in the slides, there's a drive for increased use of renewable energy. I'm sure right now the percentage of renewable energy used for power extraction must be very low. But what is your timeline? Like say after 5 years, 10 years, what's the percentage of renewable energy will be used?
Well, as a federal government, we're not kind of responsible for the energy supply per se. We feel that our job is to make good in terms of developing those technologies and making sure that they can be brought to stream in a relatively smooth way. As you can appreciate, for an operator who's been used to that kind of steady power source, whether it's any kind of coal production, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydro, and suddenly you have to deal with so-called variable power and intermittent power, whether it's solar or wind, it does bring significant challenges for those operators. And that's true across all of North America. But we don't have a target per se for renewable energy power production. We feel it's beyond our government's mandate.
Thank you. I think we're out of time now. Mr. Stetsky, over to you. You have 3 minutes.
2 quick questions. How do you ensure that Indigenous rights are protected and respected with regards to oil and gas development? And the second one is a bit of crystal ball gazing. I'm from southeastern British Columbia. A number of my constituents do work in the oil and gas industry up north. Are you able to suggest at what price per barrel would we expect to see a reversal in the employment numbers in the oil sector?
So the government has made a commitment moving forward to work more closely with Canada's Indigenous peoples in the development of Canada's natural resources. We have our legal obligations, duty to consult through the Constitution in making decisions with respect to these development opportunities. But given the location of where most of Canada's oil and gas resources take place, close to Indigenous communities, there's an opportunity to work more collaboratively in the development of these resources, both in terms of how they're developed, but also in the employment and business opportunities. Natural Resources Canada is an office out in BC called our Major Projects Management Office West, who works very closely in collaboration with other federal government departments and agencies and Indigenous communities to identify the opportunities to enhance collaboration and work more closely to identify and work together towards enhancing participation in these development opportunities going forward. It's a first step, and recognize that we'll continue to make progress in this regard, but there's a tremendous opportunity in this area. With respect to your second question, price impacts on the price of oil in the industry is hit Canadian oil companies, but global oil companies as well. But despite kind of lower prices, we still see a tremendous opportunity to grow our resources going forward. In fact, over the next 5 years, we still see that oil production will increase by approximately 800,000 barrels a day between now and 2020. And with the oil sands and with kind of the type of resource that we have in Canada, industry typically takes a long-term perspective in terms of its investment opportunities. And because of the tremendous resource base that we have here in Canada, and because global demand is expected to continue to grow going forward, that we expect longer term, there will continue to be opportunities to grow our resources. We won't likely see a lot of new investment at $40 a barrel, given the cost of developing our resources, but with kind of continued innovation to bring down costs, and with expectation that prices will rebound over the medium term, that we will continue to see opportunities and investment in this sector going forward.
I think that that's all the time we have today, so thank you. Thank you very much, the 3 of you, for coming in today. I appreciate you preparing and coming in and educating us the way you have and answering all our questions. We're very grateful. You're our first set of witnesses, and I can say with 100% certainty you're the best witnesses we've had so far. So, and I think that may hold true for a while. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We're going to suspend the meeting just for a few moments, and then we're going to go on camera and deal with some other issues.
you.